Hi, conservation voters. I'm Savana Roach, digital organizer for FCV.
And I'm Jonathan Weber, Deputy Director of Florida Conservation Voters.
So, with legislative session just around the corner, Jonathan and I have been talking about how laws are made at the Capitol, and FCV volunteers had a lot of questions. And so today we're going to go over some of the ins and outs of legislative session.
That's really exciting. I think, understanding this complicated process is one of the most important things that a citizen who wants to be engaged can do. So thank you so much for organizing this today, and I can't wait to get started.
Absolutely. So, very basic question. What is legislative session?
Great. So the Florida legislative session is the time of the year where the elected representatives and senators from all around the state who represent, again, for the state only, they come to Tallahassee, to the Capitol, and they will debate laws and, most importantly, the budget. And they get to vote on different items to see how do we change and upgrade statutes, how do we increase funding to different programs, and they'll work and they'll vote, and then they'll leave after 60 days. So this year in 2021, the Florida legislative session will begin on March 2nd, 2021, and last for 60 days. So around until April 30th or so.
Right.
In other years, in even years, I should say, the session's actually a little bit earlier in the year. They do that to accommodate the elections that happen. So it actually starts in January. So if some years you feel like, oh, it seems like it started early this year, it's because it did. Or it feels like it started later, it's because it did that way too. So just to know, it alternates year by year. And that's basically what legislative session is. So every single person in the state of Florida, based on where you live, will have one representative and one state senator. And that's how that works.
Okay. And is there anything that comes before legislative session, or is it just dead silence until March 2nd?
It's a great question. So Florida is a really big state, right? We're the third largest by population. We've got massive land area. And it seems like, boy, the 60 days seems like a really quick time to do the work of the people's business. And you would be right. That's why the legislature does meet before session actually starts. They call them committee weeks. It's where everyone comes to Tallahassee and they'll meet for a few meetings a week and then usually go home for a week or two and then come back and then back and forth. This year, things are a little bit different, of course, because of the pandemic, which is understandable.
Right.
So this year they're meeting this week, which is the week of January, the 11th. And I think they're coming back again in 2 weeks, which will be the week of the 25th. And then they'll meet sporadically up until March 2nd. And so during these committee weeks, usually they try to get the business ready for the rest of session. So they'll have some workshops and panel discussions. It's a great time to meet with legislators because they're still figuring out what bills are they going to file, what are the priorities of their constituents this year. So it's kind of like a little bit of calm and way to talk to people before we get actually into session when things get crazy.
Because it's always crazy. And so you mentioned bills and filing them. So where could an average person like me find bills that have been filed?
Great. So every single legislator usually files bills. You can find what bill each person is sponsoring by going to either the Florida House of Representatives website or the Florida Senate website, which is myfloridahouse.gov. Right. And on the Senate, it's flsenate.gov. And you go there, you click on the word that says senators, representatives, and you can find your representative, and you can click there and it'll tell you the bills that they've sponsored. So there's two different things there. There's sponsors and there's also co-sponsors. A sponsorship means that the person it's the person who filed the bill, who wrote it, or the one who actually took the text and turned it into a bill, and they're the person who is like championing that throughout the process. A co-sponsorship means that someone just really, really supports that other person's bill and wants to add their name to it to help give it momentum and to get officially on the record as supporting that really good bill that Representative so-and-so did or whatever.
Right. So to help push it through, give it more support, add more members to the team.
Yeah, exactly right. Because, it's good to every bill needs a driver, right? And it's great when you got a bunch of people behind you helping push it, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And so is there a cap on how many bills can be filed? Like, can a senator file more bills than a representative? Or is it just unlimited, free for all?
Well, you're exactly right, Savannah, is that Florida senators, they can file as many bills as they want, normal bills. They can file away. In the Florida House, they are limited to only 7 bill slots, which is actually an increase this year. Prior to this year, it was 6 bills. I think the reason they do that is because there are 120 members of the Florida House. And you can imagine, I mean, 6 bills per person times 120, and then plus there are amendments and committee bills and all sorts of other things that can pop up. It's a bunch of work for the bill drafting staff here at the Florida Capitol. So I think that's what they were trying to do, is to limit it a little bit. And of course, you're always going to have the 1 or 2 legislators out there that are just going to file anything they can and try to do as much as they can. So they tried to limit it. I think 7 is a good number. I mean, I guess they could always hire more staff. I'd be interested to see if that ever happens and try to get more work out there. But with only a 60-day legislative session, there's not a lot of time to go through each of those bills anyway. So unfortunately, a lot of bills do die, as it's called, which means they never get heard or just don't make it to the end of the process.
So you mentioned bills dying, right? So I'm guessing that'll be the opposite of it passing and being successful. So can you walk us through how a bill is passed?
Yeah, 100%. And it's not much different. If anyone out there, remember from grade school, watching the Schoolhouse Rocks videos or any of the other, various things about how a bill becomes a law, it really is exactly like that, at least on paper. Let's just say that. So the idea is that a constituent will come to the legislator and tell them about a problem they're having or an issue or a law that, gosh darn it, they'd like to see changed. And the legislator, if they agree with that constituent, would then kind of write it up like, I want to see, X changed in Florida statute. And they would send it to the people at the Capitol who do bill drafting, and they will put it into the proper format so that it's actually like a legal, it'll work legally as law.
Right.
Then the legislator will then sponsor it, which means officially file that bill. So it becomes one of their official bills. And now there it exists. It's a law. It is not passed yet. It's a bill, I should say. It's just sitting there. Now, as soon as the bill gets filed, the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate will assign that bill to various committees. So what's a committee, right? Committee is a much smaller subgroup of the larger legislative body that has, in theory, specific knowledge on that issue area, whatever it might be. Like it could be criminal justice or the environment or taxation, various things. And this smaller body will hear the bill, which means they'll look at it, they'll review it, they'll debate it, they can ask questions of the sponsor. The public can come in and support it. Lobbyists can come in and say if it's good or bad, and they can amend the bill and make it better or stronger or worse along the way. And if it passes that committee, so the committee members will vote. They'll do a hard vote on if they want to support this bill. It will then move on to the next committee. I would say on average, most bills get about 3 committee references, is the word they use, references. Sometimes they get 4. Usually the joke around town here is that if a bill gets 4 committee references, it kind of means that the speaker or the president don't like that bill because they're trying to make it harder for it to get to, final passage.
That makes sense. It's another stop for it to pass.
And another place where other legislators can, mess with it or tear it apart or whatever it might be. So you see about 3 committee references for each bill. And if that bill is successful through each of those stops, and this can take weeks sometimes for it to go from one committee to the next committee to the next committee, if it makes it through all 3 of those, it will go to the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate for the full body to then debate and vote on, just as they would in the committee, but just, of course, with everybody this time. That's called second reading, okay? That's the second reading, which means that everyone's open to add amendments. Whatever you want to do to that bill, it's open to handle. When it gets through second reading, there's not a vote on second reading. It'll just finish, and then the speaker or the president can choose to bring it up for third reading. After third reading, it's the same kind of deal where everyone can debate and ask questions and the whole thing. After third reading, they will go to a vote, and that's called final passage vote, right? So there'll be a final vote. Now, by this point, you would assume that all the amendments that you want added are on there. So things have been added, changed, taken away, new sections added, old sections taken out, whatever it might be. That bill, when you get to third reading, might look remarkably different from when the bill was born back in committee weeks, when it was just that original idea from the constituent.
Right.
You get to that point, the legislators then vote up or down on third reading, and then the bill will pass that chamber. Of course, because we have a bicameral legislature, it means that both chambers have to vote yes on the exact same piece of legislation in order for it to become a bill they can send to the governor to sign into law. So what they'll do is usually it's called being in messages, and they'll send the different, usually the bills in each chamber vary like a little bit, or like little changes here and there. So they'll back and forth between the chambers, and this is where things get really crazy right there at the end of session, when their bills are flying back and forth between the House and the Senate with little edits until they can come to an agreement on what the final bill product should be. And then once the House and Senate vote finally on third reading, after all the amendments, after messages, after everything's done, it passes, and they send it to the governor, who can then decide either to sign it into law or veto.
Wow, that's quite the process. So how does an average Joe who has no experience in this area have a say in that bill? So when someone hears about the bill and they're like, oh, well, I'm concerned about that issue, how do they submit comment on that bill?
It's probably the most important question you can ask today is, how can citizens get engaged with this process? It might seem complicated, and it is, but at the same time, there is a logic to it. It does make sense because it does follow, rules of order that have been around for, hundreds of years, right? I mean, going back to, old-timey England, right? I mean, this is a process that has been around for a long time. And so there are multiple ways for citizens to engage. Number one, you can always meet with your elected official. It's a great idea to meet with your specific elected official because you're a constituent. They got to listen to you. I mean, you're their boss. I mean, in theory.
Right. That's right.
That's right. So finding out who your representative and senator is really important. Again, you can do so by looking on the Florida House and Florida Senate website. I actually tell you, I think the Florida Senate website actually has a better lookup function. At the bottom of the page, it says "Find your senator," and it'll tell you both. So you just click on that button. It's really simple. You just type in your address, and it'll tell you who your elected officials are.
Perfect.
So call them up. Just literally pick up the phone and call them and say, "I'd love to get a meeting with you." These days, it's probably going to be a Zoom thing, which is okay. And you can get a meeting, and you can tell that legislator, "Hey, I really want you to support more funding for, Springs restoration, or to help Everglades restoration," or something. You can say anything you want, and they can take it or leave it, of course. Now, as we get a little bit further into the process, let's say there's a bill that's going to be heard in committee. There's a bill. Let's say you really love it, or even if you really hate the bill, you think it's terrible and going to ruin everything. You have a opportunity to then comment during that process, during the committee process. Every single bill, when it gets a hearing in committee, has a moment for public testimony. It's required usually, and anyone can come in, and you get a minute or two to speak your mind about this issue and be done. So at every bill stop, you have a chance to do that usually. Okay. So if you're not in Tallahassee, it does get a little hard to do that. So it's really important if the public has a chance to come to Tallahassee and actually join in some of these meetings and sit in the meeting. And then when your name is called, you go up and you say, "I think you should vote yes on this bill because it will help X, Y, and Z," or "vote no because it will endanger the Florida panther," or whatever it might be. That's your right, and I encourage you to come do that at every bill stop. If you can't make it to Tallahassee, the next best thing is, again, getting your legislator on the phone if you can, or sending an email, even tweeting about it or putting it on Facebook, or talking to your local press or media. Anything you can do to get your voice out there into the public so that your legislator may or may not see it. I mean, that's the game, right? So either come to Tallahassee, make a phone call, get on a Zoom, send an email, send a tweet, Facebook, whatever it takes. Those are all different ways that people can engage with this process. Once it gets to the floor, though, public testimony is over. Okay.
There is a expiration date on that.
There is. You can only comment during the committee process. There's no commenting on the floor once it's there. So if you want to get your voice registered on the record officially and let your legislator know how you feel about it, you have to make sure that happens during the committee process.
Okay. And so can that comment happen during committee weeks as well as in legislative session?
Yeah, definitely. As long as the bill is being heard, anybody can come talk to that bill. Of course, you can contact your legislators whenever you want. That's no problem. But if you want to have the most impact, I would say during committee weeks and during session. But as long as it's while the bill is still in committee and not on the floor, that's your opportunity to do it for sure.
Okay, good to know. That is super helpful. I feel like unless you're really into this, you wouldn't know these things. So thank you for that. And before we wrap up, just one last question. Money is the name of the game. Money kind of like determines everything that gets done. How is Florida's budget set? Like, which committee, if any, if it's just one, which committee is in charge of that?
That's an excellent question. So Florida's budget, it's actually the interesting thing about this is that there's only one thing that the Florida legislature is required to do each year per the Florida Constitution, and that is set a balanced budget. That's the only thing they have to do. They don't have to pass one bill besides the budget. That's it. Of course, they pass dozens and dozens of bills each year, but if they really wanted to, they could come in, do the budget, and go home. That's like really for 60 days and then go home. So the budget process begins, I would say, actually the year before session, actually, when all the executive agencies, like let's say the Florida Department of Environmental Protection or the Florida Department of Transportation or law enforcement, whatever it might be, they will submit their legislative budget request in writing to the legislature to kind of let them know, like, hey, here's the funding that we think we need for next year. Usually it's going to look very similar to the budget from the year before, right? So I'm sure some increases here and there, or maybe they closed a certain department, so there'll be less funding in that section, whatever it might be.
Right.
So the legislators will start with that legislative budget request, and they'll also start with the budget from the year before, right? And they'll just start there and look at it and say, okay, what is recurring funding? What's funding that needs to keep going, right? Or what was something that was a one-time thing only? Like, let's say they wanted to build a new pavilion at a state park. Well, that's a one-time thing. I mean, you pay for it and you're done. Whereas if you're going to fund, the highway patrol, clearly you need funding every year to fund the highway patrol. So they start with that initial budget right there. There are two main committees that handle the budget. In the House, it's the House Appropriations, and it's called Senate Appropriations in the Senate.
Okay.
Underneath the appropriations, they break up the budget by issue area. So these smaller appropriations committees can meet and discuss these smaller issue areas. For example, for the environment, there's an Environment Appropriations Committee in both House and Senate. I think it might be called the Natural Resources Appropriations, something like that.
Right.
So you can go in there and they'll debate the issues right there, and then they will make recommendations to the bigger Appropriations Committee, which will then take all this information and then look at how much money we actually have. And then here's where things get a little tricky, let's just say that, is that the budget leaders will usually then go behind closed doors to iron out the big differences and to make sure the money is spent where they think it should go. Unfortunately, I would say the public and, for that matter, rank and file members in the legislature are usually cut out of this process a little bit, to the point where not everyone knows what's going on, where money is going, what's happening, until they unveil the budget at the end of session. And then it's like, oh, everyone scrambles to go look in the budget and see if their pet thing is in there, right?
Right.
So that's a little weird at the end. And of course, the House passes a budget and the Senate passes a budget. And if there's differences, and there are always differences,
I'm sure.
That's where the horse trading comes in, and the bartering and the whole thing, and everyone's trying to swap this and $1 million here for a couple $100,000 in these 10 different categories. Everyone's switching and stuff all over the place to come to a common agreement that everyone can at least say, fine, it's done. And they'll vote on it, and they'll get it out of the both chambers and get it to the governor. Once the budget gets to the governor then goes through it, and he can line item veto basically anything he wants. As we saw last year, he vetoed up to $90 million of water projects and highway projects, like infrastructure projects as well.
Right.
So that can happen any year if the governor has a problem with something. So the budget process is complicated, but again, there are committees that will meet to talk about various aspects of it. And I strongly encourage everyone, if you've got any kind of stake in the game as it comes to Florida Forever funding or Everglades funding, Springs funding, like definitely speak up early and during committee weeks to make sure that it's a priority for you and your family.
Right. So the earlier the better.
I'm sorry, say that.
So the earlier the better.
Yeah, the earlier the better is the way to do it for sure.
Gotcha. Yep. All right. Well, that is super helpful. I feel like we got into some really deep and nitty gritty things that don't often get re-explained. So thank you so much for that. And I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. This has been very informative for me, at least. I know I never even heard of some of these things until I began working in this area. So I think that this will be a very helpful tool for all of our members to watch. Thank you, Jonathan.
Let me just add one more thing is that if this seems overwhelming, and it certainly does for me, and I work in this process sometimes, I strongly recommend that you look towards organizations like ours. There are plenty of others out there as well that work in the process, and their job is to help connect elected officials with their constituents. And we'd be happy to help do that in any way we can. I can help find the information for whoever is your legislator is. I'm happy to tell you what their phone number is and help connect you in whatever way it takes to help make sure your voice is heard in this process. There's lots of groups that want to facilitate that, and look to them, and they will help you navigate this kind of complicated process.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for reminding me of that. All of our volunteers, and even if you're not a seasoned volunteer with us, come to me, an organizer, and we will be happy to connect you with the right people.
That's right.
All right, awesome. Thank you, then.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you, Savannah. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
All right, we good?